Okay, this is Stuart Rhodes with Oath Keepers, and I have on, we're talking to you right now is Greg McWhorter. Greg is an Oath Keeper from Indiana who, Greg, you worked in the Indianapolis Police Department, is that correct?
I worked with the Marion County Sheriff's Department in Indianapolis, Indiana, in Marion County.
Okay. If you don't mind telling the folks, like, what your law enforcement background is and training?
Yeah, sure. I started with the Marion County Sheriff's Department in 2004 in the jail division. Everybody with the Sheriff's Department there starts in the jail division. That's where you kind of get your feet wet and really in the Marion County criminal justice system. From there, I was moved to the street, and I was assigned to our fugitive warrant section. Marion County at the time had 35,000 active warrants, and the Sheriff Anderson, wanted to reduce that, so he doubled the number of deputies serving those warrants, and I did that for quite some time. During that time, I received a lot of training, and I spent 4 years on the Sheriff's Department's tactical team, called what most people call a SWAT team. And there I was, while assigned to that team, I received my Indiana Law Enforcement Academy instructor certification and was certified by the Indiana Law Enforcement Academy as a law enforcement instructor. I was also assigned as the team's instruction coordinator, so I put together training for the team and also shopped around for training for our team members to attend. And I also attended several times during that the Safariland Less Than Lethal instructor course and its periodic courses to re-educate the instructors that it had already certified. And that certified you in distraction devices, which are commonly referred to as flashbangs, chemical munitions such as tear gas and OC, commonly referred to as pepper spray, and impact munitions, which are like bean bags and rubber baton rounds and things of that nature. And then after being there for a while, I was moved over into our gang section, and I worked in our gang unit for a while before I left the Sheriff's Department and moved out of state to take a different job.
Gotcha. And you said that in that time you also attended the FBI SWAT Academy, is that correct?
Yeah, there have been the FBI SWAT school is put on periodically, and people from different agencies can attend that academy and or that course. It's a week-long course, really good course, and it goes over a lot of the cumulative information and tactics from teams of all over the country. One of the good things about that course is that not only does it take a lot of the experience done by FBI and their serving warrants and their HRT teams, but it also takes the experience from other SWAT teams across the country. The FBI is really good at gathering that kind of information and really good at compiling it and drawing lessons to be learned from that information.
Gotcha. Okay, so given all that, you and I were talking last night. I mean, you've got two pieces we're about to publish. One on the normal process for a coordinating call, as you call it, for barricaded suspects, and we're going to get into that also. And the other thing we commented on was what you thought may be the type of non-lethal or less than lethal munitions used. But we were talking yesterday about the use of a roadblock in the felony arrest that they did on Bundy and his followers that led to the death of Lavoy Finicum. And you were saying that roadblocks are now considered to be outdated and dangerous. You don't mind talking to me about that?
Yeah, absolutely. The Marion County Sheriff's Department policy and procedure, in most law enforcement policies and procedures, you will find roadblocks addressed in the vehicle pursuit policy. Every law enforcement agency in the country should have a published vehicle pursuit policy, because vehicle pursuits are very dangerous and they're also very high profile. So you can see the interest in having a policy is to protect the agency from liability and to provide training and guidance for its officers. And when we had talked before, I had talked about how roadblocks are on the local police level, and let me be very clear, that is on the local police level, are a very antiquated technique. They are perceived as dangerous and rarely justifiable. And only in the most extreme cases have I seen them ever being used in the history of just reviewing law enforcement techniques. If we can go back to 1990, and this is just to illustrate my point of how kind of an antiquated technique. We're talking about 26 years ago. The National Institute of Justice, which is a part of the United States Department of Justice, that kind of issues standards and practices and kind of reviews police procedures around the country. They did a study on restrictive policies for high-speed police pursuits. And this was back in May of 1990, this study was published. And they studied the Mesa County Sheriff's Department, the Nassau County Police Department, the Phoenix Police Department, and the St. Petersburg Police Department's studies, policies on vehicle pursuits. In those vehicle pursuits, you will find, in those vehicle pursuit policies, you'll find where these four agencies have specifically addressed roadblocks. And if you don't mind, I'll read from that what their policy was at the time in 1990, and I'm sure it has not changed much now, because like I said, roadblocks are viewed kind of as an antiquated tactic. The Mesa Police Department lists roadblocks as roadblocks are only allowed with a supervisor monitoring, and roadblocks are allowed when possible only if you could pick a safe location. That policy is the least restrictive one of the four that was studied, but it specifically says it's not to be used by officers who have not completed prescribed training. So even were allowing roadblocks at the time in their policy, the policy specifically says that there's specific training for it. And we go to the Nassau County Police Department. If you go into where they discuss roadblocks in their pursuit policy, it specifically says in the beginning of the roadblock section, roadblocks are dangerous and difficult to properly establish. No roadblock may be established until both dispatcher and pursuing officers have been notified. And when you go down to where it says fixed roadblocks which block road to the extent that little or no outlet remains, fixable roadblocks are extremely dangerous and are rarely justifiable. Then we go down to the Phoenix Police Department, and you see where it talks about how to terminate their pursuit and boxing in, ramming on roadblocks. Ramming, boxing in, and blocking the road with police vehicles are prohibited. The only exception is boxing in an unaware suspect to avoid a pursuit. So the Phoenix Police Department just outright prohibits roadblocks. Then we go to the St. Petersburg Police Department, and you go down to their policy talking about boxing in, ramming, and roadblocks. Roadblocks shall not be used to stop a violator. So the St. Petersburg Police specifically prohibit roadblocks and use the word shall not be used. And this is back in 1990. And that was at the time in where a lot of the current policies that are used across the country right now were going through their growing pains.
What was the result of that Institute for Justice survey? Did they come out with recommendations for the country?
Well, that study was listing a study and talking about how to pursuit policies and how to develop a pursuit policy. And those agencies were listed, and that study was kind of being put out as a guideline for agencies to develop a pursuit policy. Frequently, when you'll see law enforcement officers do something questionable, and especially back then, you will find that there was not a specific policy to address it. One of the other activisms that I'm involved in is with Dan Johnson, a good friend of Oath Keepers, and Dan's Solutions Institute. And I helped with a group out west that was working to end police departments shooting dogs. And as I was working with this group to kind of help them understand what's going on, what kind of training and things, I asked them to first get with the chief of police out in their area, and I believe it was Albuquerque, and to find out what the policy was. And when they got back with me, they found out that there was no policy. They did not have a policy on how to handle these dogs, and that was something that directly contributed to these officers having such a high amount of shooting people's dogs. So they were able to work with them to get a policy in place for these officers. And that comes with these pursuit policies back in 1990, where many departments did not have a pursuit policy. So the National Institute of Justice was putting out a study to produce guidelines to help these departments develop a policy. And these were
what's the guidelines. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. What's the industry standard now? Is the industry standard pretty much now that you do not use roadblocks because they're so dangerous, or what is the standard across the country?
Oh, yeah. And like I said, the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department, IMPD, one of the largest police departments in the country, they forbid roadblocks. The Marion County Sheriff's Department. Marion County Sheriff's Department is one of the largest sheriff's departments in the country, over 600 deputies. They forbid the use of roadblocks. And if we can go
and why? What does a roadblock do that is so dangerous? We can kind of walk through that.
Well, part of the view about them is that they're considered a deadly force. And that has been one of the big things about roadblocks, is that they create a deadly force situation. And you'll have a vehicle, sometimes at a high rate of speed, approaching a roadblock, and with officers feeling threatened for their lives, which they very well should because they're standing in front of a moving vehicle, they will, sometimes you'll have seen in the past, begin to fire at the cars, creating a deadly force encounter. And conversely, just the impact of the vehicle, the moving vehicle into the stop vehicles has a severe or very high potential to cause serious bodily injury or death to the driver, for where the stopping reason, the probable cause for the stop, could be a misdemeanor. And the courts have found, deadly force is never authorized to make an arrest for a misdemeanor.
Well, even for a felony, it's still the same problem as you've got, like in this case. And apparently this roadblock was put on a curve. It was like after a turn. And so now there's, I think, a decent argument made that he could not have possibly have seen the roadblock in time to come to a stop. What do you think about that?
Well, it's when we talk about this specific case in Oregon, there's the FBI has had a lot of time to get as many resources out there as possible, and a roadblock is a really bad technique to end the pursuit versus all the other common techniques that are out there right now, like spike strips or things like that. And you have a huge advantage too, of where the FBI obviously had aerial capabilities where they could have done many other things and just have simply followed from the air.
In these departments that have prohibited their officers from doing roadblocks, what do they do instead?
Well, a lot of agencies teach the PIT, the pursuit intervention technique. That involves, we've seen it all on TV. It was something that was kind of developed in California because they have such a large amount of police chases. And you'll see that a lot of these agencies that authorize a PIT send their officers through annual training. It's a certification. In Marion County, for example, the Sheriff's Department there were only a few officers who were certified to use the PIT maneuver. So you can see how an agency of 600 deputies took the PIT maneuver very seriously and only trained so many officers to do it because it requires a lot of training.
What does it look like? How does it work?
Well, that's the technique where we've all seen on TV where you see the officer come up alongside the rear quarter panel of the vehicle being pursued, and they slightly nudge the rear quarter panel with their front quarter panel and bumper, and it causes the car to spin out. And when properly executed, car do a 180 and will stop. You'll see the car will do a 180 and then it kind of lock up its transmission when it spins out, and the vehicle will stop when properly executed. And then that kind of leaves you with someone either in their car or someone who gets out the car, flees on foot. When properly executed, these things are risky, but it's a very tried and true technique to stop a car. And then you also see without it crashing into stationary vehicles, right? Right, and particularly it's used by a lot of highway patrols because the highway patrol can kind of see where a pursuit's going on the highway stop any other cars from getting on the highway, and that allows the police to use a pit without any bystanders in place. And it would have been a great technique out there in Oregon because there was no bystanders. It's a huge, long road through high plains desert that there was nobody on, and they were able to shut it off at both ends. You could have easily used that.
Right. Now, another one is the strip. You mentioned there's a new version of the spike strip that actually wraps your axle. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, there's a new version of the stop sticks. We all see the stop sticks where officers in the 90s, the old ones, where they kind of look like just a piece of metal with some nails in it, and that evolved into the current stop sticks, where it's a small triangular box. It has a cord. You kind of slide it out and try to get it on the tires. That's one of the more contemporary versions. The newest version that's been tested and is being tested by other agencies kind of looks like a net. And it's a net you kind of slide across the road. It's made of cable, steel cable, and has spikes coming out of steel cable. Those spikes will get into the vehicle's tires, kind of wrap around the tires and the axle, and there's been videos of this device stopping box trucks almost in their tracks. So these kinds of things are readily available out there, and they're evolving and becoming much better as time goes on and more research is done on how to stop vehicles.
So how would that look? Let's say they had not used a roadblock, but instead had used spike strips, and the vehicle comes to a stop. What could have been done after that? How do you handle someone like Lavoie, who had made statements that he really was not interested in spending any time living in a cement box?
Well,
what do you think would be
the
most effective way to handle it?
Yeah, that's where you look at what is available to you, and with a huge amount of resources that the FBI has and the Oregon State Police should have, you could go many ways. You prepare yourself for two things. You would prepare yourself for a barricaded subject in an automobile, where they don't want to come out of the automobile and could be potentially armed. And you prepare yourself for someone to flee once their vehicle stops, to flee from the vehicle and keep running. Now, out there in Oregon, there's not a whole lot of places to go once you leave that vehicle. So you got to prepare for those two eventualities. The second one is the easiest to prepare for, in the terms of if you have canine that can catch whoever flees, and you can prepare with less lethal devices to kind of gain compliance as soon as they leave the vehicle. If they don't want to surrender and they want to flee, there's many options of less lethal devices to use. And you can contain that person at that point too into areas, especially out there where there's nowhere to go. You know, they're not going to run into an office building or a school or something like that, because there's nothing out there. And then the other eventuality you prepare for is if they barricade in the car. And you start out by strong point in the car with an armored vehicle, and you begin talking to the person in the vehicle and begin negotiations. And hopefully, if everything works out right, you'll be able to talk them out of the car after people have been able to calm down and their adrenaline is left and they're able to think. you see a lot of people get talked out of situations like that.
And they use an armored vehicle so that the officer is not in danger of being shot, and they can just, they don't have to use deadly force. Even if the person takes a shot at them, they can just sit in the Bearcat and they're not in danger, right? Is that the point of using armor?
Yeah. See, the thing with the armor, and there has been a lot of talk about police militarization and anything, but one of those things that allows police to do is give them options. When you're out there by yourself, or when you're out there behind just your engine block of your car, and you really don't have any kind of protection, you really feel exposed because you are exposed. And so the other less lethal options that are available to you will require further exposure versus using armor, using a Bearcat, where you can fire these less lethal devices from almost complete cover. You see Bearcats that have, gun ports on the side that you can just get a 40 millimeter launcher or shotgun through, and you can be able to use that cover and really affect the arrest without exposing yourself to small arms fire and from handguns.
You can use less than lethal, like beanbag rounds. You can use like beanbag rounds, CS rounds, the rubber balls. All that stuff can be used through the ports. That's what you're talking about when it came to any barricaded suspect, right? Like in a building. You try to talk them out, but they won't. Eventually, if you have to go in and get them out, you use CS to drive them out, and you do that from behind the cover of being inside the MRAP or the Bearcat. So when they come out, even if they come out shooting, you can still hit them with beanbag rounds and subdue them without having to use lethal force, right?
Exactly, or even where you'll have someone who would even maybe point the gun at themselves, and now you have someone taking themselves hostage. You can still have all those options available to you without exposing yourself really to much danger at all, without expose yourself to any danger. And that is one of the things that having that armor available to you allows. It allows you to use those options, because now you're not asking that officer and a man to cover him with lethal force to expose themselves to an extremely deadly situation.
So in this situation, they could have just, when he ran from the initial stop, they could have just used the strips. He hits that, immobilizes the vehicle, and then you could approach slowly, just approach with a Bearcat and talk to him, right? And you said, let the adrenaline wind down and just talk and say, here's where we're at. And then negotiations started in. Do you think there would have been a better way to roll than what they did?
Absolutely. And, clearly the equipment was available to them. It was out there. It's been staged. So, having that available to them isn't the issue. It's just picking up the bad tactics, which, again, goes back to the roadblock. And if we can go back to the roadblock for just a moment, the Oregon State Police don't publish their pursuit policy online, but however, if we look at a contemporary pursuit policy in Oregon, we can look at the Portland, Oregon's pursuit policy. And in their pursuit policy, they don't call roadblocks, they call it barricading the road. And in their policy, they also have the pit technique. And the pit in their policy, and I'm reading from their policy, the pit is not deadly force when employed on a eluding vehicle that is traveling at or below 45 miles per hour. And then when you look at when they talk about barricading, this is the current policy for Portland PD. Barricading is considered deadly force, and barricading requires the approval of a supervisor. Furthermore, barricading must be set up in such a manner to afford the fleeing suspect ample time to see the barricade and stop his or her vehicle. So that's the
issue here is that I'm reading it right now too, and that's what I'm looking at. It's like, well, was he given time? It looks like it was intentionally set up after a curve, kind of like a military ambush, frankly, where you set it up after a curve so that the person is surprised by it and they don't have time to.
Yeah, and I feel that really affected, that ups the quintessential pucker factor where you come around that curve, now you see it, now you don't even really have time to think. And that's why he went into the snow. I mean, that was his only option, or to run into the vehicles. So it's, going back to that roadblock, it's a really bad tactic. The roadblock itself was a bad tactic. And when you have a bad tactic that's poorly executed, bad things happen.
Well, so basically, looking at this policy for the Portland PD, it's considered deadly force, period, even when done right. But even when authorized as deadly force, you're supposed to then give the person time to stop. So it seems like they went way overboard twice over, using a deadly force technique instead of a less, non-deadly force technique, and then not giving him time to even see it before he was on it. So, so it might well be that he was doing everything he could to stop and hit the snowbank as an alternative to crashing into the vehicles.
Right. And when you look at the decisions available to him at the time, you really left him with not a whole lot of options. However, if you could have stopped the vehicle in another manner without a roadblock, particularly, like I said, out there in high desert out in Oregon, there with really no place to go, you really give a chance for things to simmer down and let negotiations do what they are meant to do. Negotiations are meant to save lives. Negotiations are meant to give people a chance to not make poor decisions and for things to end safely. And in that kind of situation where things are literally going through people's heads at 100 miles an hour, you can see how easily those kind of bad decisions can be made.
Well, it reminds me of the situation of the 12-year-old boy being killed in Cleveland, where the cop, instead of doing it right, addressing him from a distance, using his PA system, the kid in the park with the toy gun, he could have just stayed back at a distance, behind his engine block, using his PA system, told the kid to take whatever's in his, turn around and put whatever's in your waistband, put it on the ground, and all that kind of stuff, go spread eagle, and then approached him. Instead of doing that, he just raced up on him and leaped out of the vehicle and put himself right in front of the kid and then shot him. And this is kind of similar. This is the same kind of thing, right? You're creating a close contact with someone that you think might have a gun, and you're putting everybody in that pucker factor, immediate 100-mile-an-hour decision-making process, right?
Well, yeah, and it burns me up to see that situation in Cleveland, because I can tell you as an instructor, as a tactical instructor, there's no way he was trained to do that. There's no way that the Cleveland PD is training its officers to approach it's normal patrol officers to approach an armed person in their patrol vehicle up close and personal like that. It's suicide on the armed person. There's nowhere for you to go. Your police car is a huge target, and it does not stop bullets. Your engine block might. The other 75% of the car does not. And it's really bad to see officers using such piss poor tactics to create a deadly force situation. And even historically, the courts have found that the leeway that is given to officers in deadly force situations does not protect them when they create the deadly force situation, when it's created by the officer, by his tactics, and not at the decisions of the subject they're dealing with.
So in that case with the kid, the officer, like charging right up on him and in a split second jumping out and then shooting him, he can't really just justifiably defend himself by saying, well, I thought he had a gun, because he's the one who put himself in that close proximity for that split-second decision. So that's what you're saying, right?
Right. And, and even as in being in court and being grilled by defense attorneys for every small decision I've made in the most mundane of arrests, a defense attorney, the first thing they're probably going to ask is, how were you trained? What is your training? And they're going to put a training officer on the stand, and they're going to ask that training officer, how did you train this person to respond to this? Is this in accordance with the guidelines that you trained them? And you're going to see that instructor tell the truth, and the instructor is going to say, no, we've never trained our people to approach an armed person in that manner. And that's one of the biggest things that you see consistently about law enforcement is a lack of training. But when you have an officer like the officer in Cleveland who has been trained appropriately but still makes the poor decisions, you really, in that case, the grand jury failed to indict him, but you really see the reason behind an indictment.
Right. I mean, frankly, I think the reason they failed to indict him is because the prosecutor didn't want to. The old saying about a grand jury can indict a ham sandwich is true, unless that ham sandwich has a badge, in which case most prosecutors just flat refuse to, steer the grand jury towards an indictment. I see no defense for that officer's actions. To me, that was a negligent homicide at the very minimum. But frankly, given the way he did it and the way he just rolled up on the kid, didn't give him time to even respond to any commands, just shot him. I call that murder in my book. What do you think?
Well, it's definitely a chargeable offense, and maybe we'll see in the civil courts some kind of justice being done, but that doesn't bring back a little boy. And there is inside the law enforcement community that part of the officers who you don't want to work with those guys. You don't want to work with those guys who are going to put you in that kind of situation, who are going to get you in front of a grand jury. And they don't make the news every day when those kind of officers are fired or are released. In a lot of those cases, you don't ever hear about, but they happen. And you'll see agencies that are having turnover problems, and part of that could be pay, part of it could be, the benefits package, but a part of that is also that agency is letting bad officers go. And so you find that...
So like oh, go ahead.
You find that most officers who are just out there trying to do their job and go home safe, they don't want to work with those kind of guys. And I'm not particularly aware of what experience or anything this guy had, but it's unfortunate that a guy who would make that kind of decision was still on the Cleveland Police Department.
So bringing it back to Fenneco, this is in a way similar. Instead of rushing up on him in the close range and causing that close range deadly force encounter, they set up a roadblock, or a barricade they call it in Oregon, around a curve that brought him to them. And in the same situation, though, an armed suspect or suspected armed suspect, within a matter of feet of armed officers. Now everyone's in that pucker factor, 100 mile an hour situation. He jumps out of the vehicle, and now you got officers exposed, not behind cover, standing there in front of him, making snap decisions. So, same problem, right?
Yeah, and it puts everyone in a bad situation, because I don't think there's anybody who reasonably expects an officer to wait to get shot at before they will defend themselves. But on the same note, no one wants to see officers creating a situation where deadly force is necessary. The officers should be preserving that moral high ground and responding to the deadly force situation, not creating the deadly force situation.
So the smart thing to do here would have been to use the strips, create distance, keep distance, and if you're going to approach, if he's not coming out, then approach using a Bearcat, so you're not vulnerable to being shot, and you still have time to use less than lethal, tear gas, rubber balls, beanbag rounds, etc., to get him out of the vehicle and subdue him if you're going to take someone into custody. That's the way to do it, especially if you think the person might fight. You know, that the person's potentially, not going to give up without a fight, and almost like a suicide by cop situation. As you said, you still have an obligation to try to avoid taking life if you can.
Right, and like I said, the presence of some armor out there allows for the flexibility of those tactics. It gives those officers more options to be able to make a smart call, and it also gives them time to make that call. When you are in that situation where you're deciding if a guy is pulling a gun or if he's pulling out a stopwatch or a cell phone, it's rough to make that snap decision at that time, because you're going to have to live with that decision forever. But with that armor out there, with using good tactics, with good preparation, with thinking through your scenario and plotting out your scenarios, having all of that available to you, and using smart tactics like spike strips, even if you drove around the spike strips that were on the road, he was going to go into snow, car was going to stop anyway. So was a roadblock really necessary? No. Spike strips by themselves would have worked just fine. And you could have had the armor backup to give yourself flexibility and to give yourself time to resolve the situation without bloodshed.
So what do you think? We talked before about when one of the witnesses, Victoria Sharp, had described the vehicles being hit with hundreds of rounds. And we haven't seen the vehicle yet. We won't know until we do. And we're going to be calling for independent investigation so that all evidence is turned over to the public and also to a second set of eyes. But you were talking about one potential source of that would have been less than lethal rounds. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. When I first heard her when I first heard that recording that's been all over the internet, and I thought to myself, how could anyone have lived through that if hundreds of rounds were going through that vehicle? Everyone who's ever fired a gun at a piece of metal or a piece of wood, or even gone and shot at an old car, knows that cars don't stop bullets. They don't. You know, engine block will, maybe the wheel when you crouch behind a tire wheel, but that's about it. The rest of the car doesn't stop bullets. And so anybody in that car would have been killed with hundreds of rounds going into the passenger compartment of that truck. So when I heard that, and yet, you know, she was still alive, I immediately thought, no, that had to be, they had to been using stinger balls on that vehicle to kind of get those people's attention and to gain some kind of compliance. And then when I saw the video, you can see on the video, a stinger ball has two charges. It has a small charge that pops off the head of the grenade head of the stinger balls, pops off the fuse head of the stinger ball. And then the second charge will expel all the small rubber pellets in the stinger ball. And you can see on the video the initial charge popping off the grenade head, and then immediately afterwards the next charge expelling all the rubber pellets. Now, you can't see the rubber pellets, but you can see the charges, and anyone who's used these kind of devices can tell you that that's what they were using out there. So to suggest that it was, bullets going through that car without that young lady getting killed, I don't care how low on the floorboard she is, cars don't stop bullets. And that trucks don't stop bullets like that. And when we can see the car, and I'm sure we'll see photos of it or something eventually, but when we see that, I'm sure we're going to see dozens and dozens of small, tiny dents that look like hail damage on this vehicle.
So that might explain that, but we're still back to square one though when it comes to the war himself. There's an additional problem of the political angle that's coming out now. We got the two senators for Oregon giving interviews, pretty much gloating on the fact that they had communicated directly with Obama's right hand. Look at Valerie Jarrett. They communicated with her. They communicated with the director of the FBI, and they, pretty much said that this was going to be a virus that was spreading, was to stop it. And so it seems to me that their motivation for doing this felony stop was not because of public safety. These guys have been traveling back and forth to meetings without any incident for weeks. It seems like it was purely politically motivated. It was time, as far as they're concerned, let's stop the spread of this idea of civil disobedience and people standing up for their rights and coming together in their communities. Let's shut down their free speech. This is what I find offensive and problematic in the very first place. And then the method of how they did it, not giving the guy a chance to respond and not giving him a chance to stop and using the strips instead. So this is just, even before we get a complete investigation, this is looking really bad. Like they just wanted to make an example, and they set up this roadblock around the curve. So if anybody squirted from the initial, they're going to get caught in a deadly force situation. Or am I exaggerating?
No, and it's now we can only speculate what was going on inside of the tactical commander and the special agent in charge's command center. But to me, that would first let me say this: the FBI, SWAT teams, HRT are the best in the world. They're amongst the best in the world. They have served thousands of warrants, and have ended many, many, many barricaded situations without any loss of life. These guys are squared away guys with all the training in the world and all the resources in the world, the resources of the United States government. When these guys could have been allowed, and in my opinion, if these guys could have been allowed to handle the situation without any kind of bureaucrat injecting pressure on them to end it soon, end it soon, end it soon, you would have probably seen a whole lot better result at the end of that takedown versus what we did see. These guys are well trained, very smart, very educated, and they are craftsmen of their industry, leading their industry to an end that results in tons of these situations being ended without a shot being fired or without any loss of life or without any injury to anyone. So I agree with you wholeheartedly that these guys were facing pressure from bureaucratic bosses to resolve this thing, and I think that pressure may have resulted in bad tactics.
But also the use of the Oregon State Police. It wasn't HRT that shot him. Apparently it was just two or more Oregon State police officers, right?
Right, but the entire plan and the FBI, you know, the governor of Oregon asked the FBI to resolve it because they were in charge. So, yeah, it was the Oregon State Police who were at the roadblock who were there and part of the final confrontation, but they were there in agreement with the FBI and working with the FBI and working with the FBI's tactics. So if the FBI would have felt less pressure to come up with this plan and would have been able to come up with the plans that seasoned, experienced, educated, smart tactical commanders would have came up with, we could have seen a better result.
So there's a potential that it was a race to get this done to stop them from going to the meeting in John Day, where they were going to be meeting with that whole community to form up another community of safety in Grant County, and also meet with the sheriff. So, I mean, that's what my gut tells me, is that the bad guys, the politicians, did not want, as they said themselves, they considered this a virus that was spreading. They wanted to stop it from spreading. It had nothing to do with the physical safety of the people of Harney County or anybody else. It's driven by politics. So the more they flap their gums, the more they're going to wind up slitting their own throats when it comes to their credibility. That's what's happening right now. And if it comes out that this policy, that this use of a roadblock actually goes against all the established policies in Oregon by not giving him time to stop and creating a deadly force situation, then they're done. I mean, they're done in the eyes of the public on that alone, regardless of what Lavoie did. That's kind of the whole point of this discussion, is to make people look at the use of the roadblock in the first place and the way they did it, which put everybody in a deadly force situation inherently, right? It's a deadly force situation.
Yeah, and it created a deadly force situation, and it's a situation where when Oregon State Police's policy is reviewed, and it's reviewed at a roadblock or a barricade, as it's called out there, is prohibited, and their officers are using prohibited tactics. At that point, a prosecutor should look at how these guys are trained, their rules and regulations, and determine if they were operating outside of the general protections and leeway given to police in general. A prosecutor would have to prosecute.
Right. Now, it's also entirely possible that the governor, she's in command of the Oregon State Police, correct?
Say that again.
The governor of Oregon is the commander of the Oregon State Police, correct? She's their boss.
She's the elected official in charge of the Oregon State Police, correct? And she appoints a superintendent and who administers the Oregon State Police. So that kind of
she picks the phone up and says, "Hey, I want this stopped. I want you to stop this. And I'm calling the FBI to stop it, and I want you to go stop it. And I don't care how you do it." And again, when the guy says, "Well, should we use a barricade?" It's entirely possible. I mean, I'm speculating, but it's entirely possible. She said, "Yeah, do whatever you have to do to stop him or stop them."
And seeing that,
we don't know,
and we don't know what pressure those guys were under. But I am sure that if left to just resolve it and do their jobs, these guys would have come up with way better tactics that we would be having a discussion about all these guys arrested rather than some arrested and Lavoie killed.
Right. So at the very minimum, they did have pressure from the governor, and they did have pressure from the feds, obviously, from the 2 U.S. senators, and through them, from the administration. I think that's a given. So I guess we'll find out. Part of the investigation should be the communications between all of these people and law enforcement, both federal and state. What were they told? What were they instructed? What kind of pressure was put on them to act sooner rather than later?
Yeah, and a good independent investigation will bring that out. And Oath Keeper's position of calling for an independent investigation is the proper course. It's not unheard of. It's not a extraordinary step in a officer use of force. Many agencies across the country have civilian panels that review every use of force by an officer, and this is an independent civilian panel that reviews it. So having an independent investigation on this incident is not unheard of and is not uncommon.
So, our initial idea was to take a shift at the Patriot community in Oregon, hopefully an Oregon sheriff, to be that, basically that independent investigation. His investigatory team, his forensic experts and homicide investigators and his coroner. Is that the way to go, you think, or is you have a better idea?
I think that's an excellent way to go. When you have a situation where a agency is experiencing some kind of an incident that creates some kind of controversy, having another agency come in with its investigators is also not uncommon and not unheard of. Well,
I talked to Joseph Rice last night. I was going to say that Joseph Rice from Oath Keepers and PPN there in Oregon said that the standard, I guess, if Oregon State Police is involved, is to use the sheriff's department from the next county over. That's what he said. I'm not sure about that, but we'll check. But even if they use just another county sheriff, the problem is, we don't trust Sheriff Ward as far as we instruct him, so it would have to be, a sheriff. I think in addition to whatever the standard procedure, we need an independent investigation that the community trusts, that the Patriot community trusts. Otherwise, we're always going to second guess the outcome. We'll think it's a whitewash. That's just the way it goes. So I think they need to make public all the evidence. The public can decide for themselves. They released one video, but we want to see all the dash cams, body cams, any audio from any source, radio transmissions, cell phone footage, whatever's there, media footage, whatever's available. But then, like I said, a sheriff, maybe like Sheriff Hamlin from Douglas County, the sheriff that did such a good job in the aftermath of the school shooting there, the college shooting. Someone like that who people have respect for, like a good idea.
Yeah, and that's not an extraordinary request, and it's something that if you go and you put all the information out for the public to determine, and then also have independent investigation by another agency who has its own investigators and its own experts, and it really adds credibility to whatever is determined. It really gives an opportunity for there to be a fair assessment of it. And also if that independent agency determines that, these officers created the deadly force situation, or this agency created the deadly force situation, and that deadly force situation resulted in someone's death, well, then there needs to be some kind of action taken other than administrative. And people who are creating this deadly force situation, just like in the civilian, on the other hand, if a civilian created a deadly force situation and someone died, that civilian could be prosecuted. It's the same thing here. If we need for that to happen also.
It could be prosecuted for police manslaughter, right? Homicide. Depends on the statute and the state you're in. But yeah, like you said, if you create a situation where the reasonable man's standard for use of force isn't met and was not considered reasonable, then you're in trouble. And it should be the same for anybody, whether they're badge or not, right?
Correct. And if we determine that there are politicians injecting themselves into this decision-making process that they should not be a part of, there also needs to be accountability on their part too.
Which we don't hold, snowball's chance in hell of getting some governor or senator actually charged because of their direct role in creating a deadly force situation. We don't hold a lot of faith in that ever happening. So, but here's the problem. They're going to be judged by the people, by, public opinion. The court of public opinion will judge them. And this is where we're in a dangerous situation right here, because you've got people who, the FBI thought that video was going to calm everybody down and exonerate them, and did exactly the opposite. It just ticked off people all the more. They looked at that and said, this and this are all wrong. We're doing right now. You can see on the video that he's, trying to avoid crashing into vehicles. I think he was just simply trying to avoid a deadly crash, and didn't even notice the barricades were there until it was too late to stop. And then he's jumping out, and at that point, now it's like, well, what was being said? What was he saying? What were they saying? Who shot first? Were they less than lethal rounds? Were they lethal rounds? And what was it? So you mentioned earlier, you said that the guy in the woods definitely had a taser. Is that correct?
Yeah. I have seen a slow motion freeze frame of the guy in the woods who came behind LaVoy. That guy is presenting something left-handed. You can see the small speck kind of come from in front of the what he's presenting. It's not a bullet. That is the doors, for lack of a better phrase, of a taser cartridge. And in taser training, you're trained to keep your taser on your off gun side So now you keep your taser on the side of your body away from your gun. They're separated. Or to cross draw it. So you could put it on your left side, but you could still draw it with your right hand, but you wouldn't immediately go down to where your firearm is. And having a taser on the same side with your gun is considered a big no-no, and taser does not train anyone to do that. They train you specifically not to do that. And when taser trains instructors with agencies, different agencies, on the use of their product, those instructors are training not to put a taser on the same side as your gun, to either put it on your left side so you can draw it with your left hand, or put it so you can cross draw it with your right hand, but not on the same side with your gun. So when I see that officer in the woods coming out with presenting something with his left hand, that's indicative of a taser. And to me, that officer was put out there in case the car stopped and someone fled from the vehicle. And there are probably officers on both sides of the road in the woods, and he was in the mindset of, if someone runs this way, I'm going to tase them and stop them. So that's why Lavoie gets out the car. This officer has his taser first, because he's prepared to stop anybody running from the vehicle, and to use less lethal force just to take them down and get them into custody. So when I see that officer with his left hand out, presenting with his left hand, and I see that small, speck come from his left hand, that's the doors coming off the taser as he's firing the taser.
We won't probably know until all the evidence is in exactly what happened, but it's entirely possible that he was reacting to a taser hit when he turned and dropped his hands. Is that possible?
Yeah, it's entirely possible that the taser probes hit his coat, and taser probes are very small, pinch-hook-like things. They don't penetrate. A taser only has a max range of 25 feet. Small, tiny wire connected to the probe is only 25 feet in length. That officer looks like he's around 20 to 25 feet. The probe would not have necessarily penetrated a heavy coat or leather coat. So I think that what happened is that Lavoie is facing the officer that's closest to the road. That officer's giving him commands, get down or hands up or whatever. The officer from behind goes to deploy the taser, and the taser's not effective because it doesn't penetrate his coat. The probes, like I said, they're very small. They don't have a lot of momentum with them either, just enough to get the barb into your skin or into your shirt. He feels the taser probe and hears the pop from the cartridge when the compressed air pops, blows the doors off the taser cartridge and shoots the probes out. He hears that pop, feels the probes hitting, and turns. And the officer on the street, or closest to the street, who is in a mental state of that this guy is going to shoot it out with us, fires. Now, the FBI report that there was a pistol in Lavoie's pocket, that is what it is. But if we can look at what we see in this video from the air, that is what I see. And as a police officer, I see that. I can see this guy turning that, and this officer next to the street he's in that, that pucker zone, and he's very concerned about a gunfight and very concerned about a shootout, and I could see him firing based off of those movements. But if we didn't put those officers, or if their bosses did not put them in that situation, we would have had a better result.
So we can probably say that the combination of politicians, the governor and the senators and et cetera, and bureaucratic leanings combined created a deadly force situation that put Lavoie, and I would say intentionally, into a situation where he comes around a bend, there's a barricade, there's no time to stop. They've created a lethal force situation. And now they've got officers there with both lethal and non-lethal, and there you go. And it might well be that he wasn't not going for his gun, he'd simply be reacting to being tased, putting his hands towards the head, like people tend to do. Or maybe fishing around his guy to try and find the barbs, and that's when he was shot. That's the best light, right? That's pretty much the best light you're going to find in this situation.
Yeah, it's a compiling series of unfortunate things that resulted, but could have been averted by allowing the tactical commanders down with the FBI's tactical team to do their job and to not pressure them to try to resolve something quickly, but to allow them to do their job. If you're going to arrest them. If the arrest is right or wrong, we work that out in court. That's called due process. We work that out in court. We give every person a day in court, and we work it out there. But if we create the situation that deadly force is being used, and we create a deadly situation, we have to find out where that situation was created, and people have to be held accountable for it.
Now, was that officer that the one that was facing him in the road, or on the edge of the road, was that the same officer that was almost hit by his vehicle?
From what I see, yeah. You see the officer as Lavoie's approaching the roadblock. You see that officer start to get out from behind those vehicles because he's anticipating Lavoie's truck hitting those vehicles and those vehicles hitting himself. Lavoie's truck goes in the snow. This officer is very narrowly avoided being run over. It looks like he got up and he was from behind cover already, so he had to deal with what he had to deal with right there. All the other officers, you notice these two officers, the one from the woods and the one in front of Lavoie, are the only ones not behind cover. So it seems that was the guy.
He could have moved back behind
like
cover.
That was the guy, yeah. Yeah, he could have went back behind cover. He could have sought out cover. I would have sought out cover. It's even if I was just almost hit, I would have sought out cover. You're dealing just in the sense of just your everyday officer. You're dealing with somebody who's armed. You're going to want to seek out some real substantial cover, and maybe he could have went back to behind those vehicles. It's real tough. His decision making at that time, it's a tough call, but it's one of those things where it was just a lot of bad events all rolled up into one. And the people who put those officers there in a roadblock, which is, like we discussed, a very antiquated technique, and it's prohibited by other agencies, outright prohibited. We're creating that situation.
And this is another thing is of course, the background of all this is no one trusts.
Yeah, exactly. No one trusts. Yeah, no one's trusting that these decisions are being made responsibly. No one's trusting the law enforcement to do their job responsibly, because we, as a citizenry, we only consent to these, less lethal devices, tasers, SWAT teams, armor. We only consent to these things being around if they're used responsibly and used in the manner that they're intended to be used, and that's to save lives. And not just the police lives, but also the suspects that they encounter.
Right. And the other problem we're going to have is people just don't trust the police, to be blunt. They don't trust them to do their own investigations. And, now there's speculation, well, they planted that gun on him. So this is the problem we're in, is people, it's not just in, urban black communities that don't trust the cops. It's now all over the place. So, and I look back at, like in the Weaver case, Jerry Spence, the lawyer that defended Randy Weaver, in his book about the case, he alleges that the FBI planted evidence and lied on the stand to try to frame Randy Weaver for a shootout he was not even in. So this is the backdrop to all of this, is this pattern of deceit and lying on the stand that people just don't trust them. And that's why I think it's incredibly important that they release every bit of evidence to the public and give us access to the truck, and we have to have a second set of eyes. So, hey, real quick, and we've been doing an awful long interview here, but real quick, if we could switch gears. We talked before about the handling of the refuge, and we were talking about the process that they would normally go through, negotiations, and negotiations began to falter or fail. And at some point, they're going to try to extract them out of there. If you could walk people through how that would look, if it was done right, how would it look?
Well, if done right, you have the material, manpower, all your resources in place to do it right. And you move in with your armored vehicles. You strong point the house in front, strong point it in the back. Cover whatever exits that you have to cover. My understanding is that their equipment to do this is currently staged out there at the airport. So the resources being available isn't a question, in my opinion. You just establish contact, start talking to these people. Now, with that being said, you're in a very remote location. They really don't have nowhere to go. They've kind of self-contained themselves. But should it come time to affect the arrests and to go and remove them, after you strong point the house, you reestablish contact, and you just tell them, hey, you establish negotiations. You tell them, hey, we need you guys to come out. So let's work toward that end. And as long as they're working toward that end and they're having real talks about it and getting somewhere with those talks, you should keep talking. Negotiations should not end. You should allow negotiators, and again, the FBI is some of the best negotiators in the world. You should let them do their job. So you allow these guys to do their job, they should be able to talk them out. And
that's where they are right now. Like you said, it's so remote, they don't even need to bring armored vehicles in close and and block in the house. There's no one around. They're not going anywhere. So they're just sticking to negotiations. And so far, they're handling it right. Wouldn't you say when it comes to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's different. It's a lot different in a town and city because you have this, urban area where people are absolutely, the neighborhood is absolutely at risk. Here, in this case, not so much. So when you have the naysayers kind of looking at it as, why aren't they up there with their Bearcats and calling these people out? Well, they don't really have to. These people aren't going nowhere. You can sit back from afar and just watch and talk to them via phone or whatever. You don't really have to because they're not going anywhere. And it's not something that's endangering the whole neighborhood.
It's like the Freeman standoff in the middle of nowhere in Montana, and it took 81 days. And they waited 81 days, and those guys finally came out. And that's what when we did that open letter to the federal law enforcement and military, that's what we said is, handle it like that. Take your time. There's no rush. And I think that still holds. And so far, I mean, there's a lot of folks who are upset about the way that Jason Patrick was done. They told him, you won't be charged if you come out, apparently. And he walked about 7 miles and turned himself in at a checkpoint, and then they charged him when they arrested him for an offense. And now they're saying, well, he had an outstanding warrant and he knew he'd be charged. So there's a question about that. But other than that, they seem to have been handled pretty well. We were working with our local guy there, Senator Santoro, was on the phone this last Tuesday night and early Wednesday morning talking to the FBI contact he had while that Shea, legislator from Washington State, had a guy on the ground from Coalition of Western States. He had a guy at the refuge who was talking to the women and children and leaving, and so he was able to get folks to leave. And Senator Santoro was able to get the FBI to hold back that column of Bearcats for a little while to give those folks time to leave. And they let them go. They let them go. 4 carloads of people left. And then afterwards, about an hour later, a young couple called up and said they wanted to go. The girl was pregnant. They wanted out. The FBI told them, well, go ahead and take one of the government vehicles there and drive out. And they did. And Senator Santoro met them in town and took them in his hotel room and then called the FBI and said, here's where your vehicle is. Can pick it up. So they've been pretty good about that, coordinating with us and letting folks leave without charging them, unless they were, one of the main leadership, I guess, like Jason Patrick was. So your assessment right now, they should continue just to wait. Time's on their side. These guys aren't going anywhere, right? There's no justification for going in there at this moment and trying to get them out. And if they do that, I think it'd be driven by politics again. But what do you think?
Yeah, and, as you said, you listed out all these things where they, let carloads of people go. And to me, that is indicative of, these negotiators working with these people and working with their commanders, because the negotiators need credibility with the people they're negotiating with. So you have these negotiators who are trying to get these people out, and the people are afraid, I don't want to get shot by the FBI. I don't want to go to prison. And the negotiators are working with these people. You are seeing a lot of work with these negotiators, and through our side of it, negotiating with the FBI, trying to get these things done. So if that's a good example of, if you allow these tactical commanders to do their job, you're going to get good results. And they know, these tactical commanders know, time's on their side.
So as long as you don't get like with Janet Reno in Waco, she decided to put, to order them to go do things, as long as the politicians stay out of it, we should see bloodless resolution to this.
Absolutely. And that is
was handled badly, I think, by creating that roadblock and doing it the way they did it. But hopefully the politicians will stay out of the HRT's handling of the refuge.
Yeah, you let these guys, like I said, who are the best in the world do their job, they're going to be able to do this with no loss of life. And you stay out of their way. These politicians stay out of their way. They can get it resolved. If the leadership of the occupation has to be arrested, okay, we deal with that. We deal with that later. But these guys can have the resources, they have the training, they have the expertise to make that happen without any loss of life, as long as these politicians stay out of their way.
Well, last I heard, the only guy that's still in the refuge that has a warrant out is a prior from Wisconsin. That's Sean Anderson. The rest of them have been told they're free to go if they'll leave. Now, let's say they don't, and they just refuse to leave, and it comes to a point where they're at impasse. What would it look like down the road, like way down the road, when they finally went in?
Well, to Sean Anderson's case, he has an open warrant out in another state. He's going to be arrested. Period. I think my advice to these people is to leave. Like Amon has released from jail, you guys just go. And this guy's just got to suck it up and say, yeah, I'm about to get arrested. And these people need to leave. Now, should it go down that road, they don't want to leave, and it's time to go and effect an arrest, well, like we talked before, the Bearcats move in, Armor moves in, they start to call these people out, and then an impasse, is reached. No, we're not coming out. Screw you guys. Well, then you can escalate your tactics then. You start cutting off all their communications. You cut off their cell phones. You cut off their, electronics. FBI is more than capable of doing all of that. You isolate them. You continue trying to get them back on the phone. That's the first thing. Continue to try to break that impasse. Then you escalate your tactics a little more, and you can start working with using CS, working it into the building from the outside rooms of the building, so that you kind of make it uncomfortable for them to be inside that building, and they move their way to either one room of the building or to the exit of the building. They move their way to the exit of the building and they come out. If you've lined up your armor up there right and your Bearcats lined up right, you can use less lethal munitions and less lethal chemical munitions to get compliance from them. And you can do it from behind cover, where even if they are firing at these Bearcats, you can still fire your less lethal munitions and get the proper effect and start to get compliance without having to just unload on these people. And most of the time, in my experience, CS and OC take the fight out of people. They when you expose them to that and they come out, they're done. They're like, whoa, this is overwhelming my system. I'm having a rough time breathing. It's reacting to me. I want out. Just help me. And they give up. So I would like to see it resolved in that kind of manner, and that's kind of how your normal barricaded subject training will go. An entry is the last option. It's the last thing you want to do. Nobody wants to go and do an entry and start, removing people like that. That's your very last option. And I can only see that if maybe you hear a gunshot, somebody shot themselves or something like that inside. I don't see an entry happening.
Yeah, that would only be justified if you had a hostage situation, right?
And that would only be, and you would only do an entry on a intervention. That's only in a hostage intervention where now the person who's the hostage taker has become aggressive to the hostage or has shot the hostage or is harming the hostage in some way other than confining them. So if you're doing a hostage intervention like that, yeah, entry would be called for, and you got to go in there and confront this person directly. But you would only do an intervention if that hostage is now in a heightened state of danger, where now they've been shot, they're injured, they've been stabbed, or they're being beaten, to within an inch of their life or something. Now you got to go in and you got to go in that. That's when an entry would be called for. And I don't think an entry is necessarily going to be called for here in this situation.
Well, you don't have any of that. You don't have any hostages. There's no, So here you have, if at the worst case in the end, a few people who are just simply not going to give up and want to, it's pretty much they're suicidal. And like you said, you can handle it through less than lethal means. And that's where the presence of a Bearcat would help. And you mentioned that we were talking before, you mentioned that now we have CS that does not cause fires. So that's one thing that's one thing that happened in Waco that people were so upset about, was the introduction of CS using methods that were prone to ignite.
Yeah, absolutely. You can introduce CS into that building, non-pyrotechnic CS that doesn't have an open flame. Pyrotechnic canisters used for outside for riot control and things like that. They have an open flame that's burning the chemical and releasing it into the air. There is non-pyrotechnic that is fired from launchers. They go through a window. You shoot it from a low angle to a high angle, shoot it into the ceiling, shoot it into the corners of the walls, and it releases this powder, micro-pulverized powdered CS and powdered OC, and it makes the environment very, very, very uncomfortable to be in. And you force the people to leave that room, or you completely interrupt their decision-making process, and they give up. And in my experience, they give up. So hopefully, when should it come time for that, should that happen, and an impasse is reached, and they're not talking to the FBI for a while, and the FBI decides, well, if they're not going to talk to us, we got to go escalate our tactics a little bit, and they go, and you shoot in that non-pyro CS and OC into this building, and you start getting them thinking about coming out. I think with good tactics, you'll be able to resolve this without any further bloodshed.
All right, well, good to go. Well, thanks for talking to us. I know Jason's been on the phone with us for this interview. Jason, any questions for Greg about any of this stuff?
No, I think we're good. We've got about an hour and a half worth of stuff, so we'll have to edit down and
that's a lot. Yeah, it's a long conversation. Well, Greg, thanks for any closing comments or anything from you.
No, I think it's. I think the only thing that should anyone in the decision-making process hear this, just let these tactical commanders with the FBI do their job. Stay out of their way. Let them do what they're great at doing, and that is resolving things like this without loss of life. They've served thousands of warrants. They've resolved hostage situations numerous times without anyone getting hurt. And they're the best in the world. And if our bureaucrats and politicians don't inject themselves in these guys' decision making, we're going to find a good result at the end of all this.
Well, as good as you're going to have after already having one death. Yeah. So
the best. And
oh, go ahead.
No, you just the best result that we could have under the current situation. You're absolutely right. And if we can resolve this without any further loss of life or further injury, that would be the best result that we could possibly have right now.
Now you're active in Oath Keepers and you're on our forums a lot, and of course you talk to people outside of the organization as well. Were you surprised by the reaction to that video? Were you surprised by the anger?
By the anger, no, because this gentleman was not some gung-ho militant type that, the mainstream media wants to paint him up to be. This was a cowboy who has been directly affected by the issue. He has seen it in his community, with his friends. It's real to him. People out east, they have never heard. You get east of Mississippi, people have never heard of the Bureau of Land Management. They have no idea what it is. You ask them what the Bureau of Land Management is, and they wouldn't have a clue. So when you see people who do know and who have seen what is going on out west, of course they're angry. So their anger does not surprise me at all. It doesn't surprise me one bit. And however, the only way that we can stem the possibility of anybody doing anything rash because of that anger is to have a full independent investigation and to have all the information released to the public so that it's tried in the court of public opinion, and when the independent investigation is resolved and they find wrongdoing, people who are wrongdoers are prosecuted.
Good to go. Well, I agree. Well, thanks, Greg, for talking to us for such a long time. That turned into a really long interview, but we appreciate it. And like I mentioned earlier, we're going to be putting up 2 of your written statements about these issues. If you have something you want to follow up on in writing on Finnegan's shooting, we'd be happy to publish it. So let me know, okay?
I will, absolutely.
Good to go. Thanks.